The road home was quiet. Michael Harper had taken this drive from the college back to his house 1,000 times before, always on the same back roads that curved through tall Georgia pines and long-forgotten farmland. It was just after 6:30 p.m., and the last of the sun hung low in the sky, painting the trees gold and casting long shadows across the two-lane blacktop. He had a lecture on Baldwin tomorrow. His students had been quiet today. It was midterm season, but there'd been something in the room, a tension that clung to him even now. He chalked it up to nerves. Or maybe it was the email from the dean's office, asking for a quick conversation tomorrow morning. Either way, Michael was tired. The radio murmured softly, old jazz humming through the speakers of his well-kept 2012 Honda Accord. His phone buzzed, his wife Candace, but he let it ring. He'd be home in 15 minutes. Then he saw the headlights behind him. Bright. Closer than they needed to be. He checked his speed. 42 in a 45. Still, his stomach dropped. The red and blue lights snapped on. Michael's hands instinctively went to 10 and 2. He guided the car onto the narrow gravel shoulder and came to a full stop. Dust rose outside the window like a curtain. He shut off the engine, rolled down the window, turned off the radio. He kept his hands visible, just like he had practiced. His father had taught him that when he was 14, the night after a friend's cousin was pulled over and ended up with a broken jaw. It was the black father's rite of passage, not birds and bees, but cuffs and compliance. Yes, sir. No, sir. Don't argue. Don't move fast. Don't reach. A flashlight blinded him through the mirror. Then again from the side. Footsteps crunched the gravel. The officer was white, broad-shouldered, early 40s. His badge read, W.L. Kersey. You know why I pulled you over? He asked, voice hard. No, sir, Michael said, steady low. Was I speeding? The flashlight moved across his lap, then to the glove box. License and registration. My wallet is in my back pocket. Registration's in the glove box. I'm going to reach for them now. Slowly. Michael moved with robotic precision, hands trembling only slightly. Kersey watched every movement like a hawk. As Michael handed over the documents, the officer took them, squinting at the name. You from around here? Yes, sir. I teach at the college. Oh, college man. Good for you. The sarcasm dripped like oil. The officer stepped back, but didn't return to his cruiser. Instead, he circled the car, paused at the trunk, came back. You been drinking tonight? No, sir. Drugs in the vehicle? No, sir. You sure? You look a little nervous. Michael inhaled slowly. Just want to get home, sir. The flashlight clicked off. Kersey stepped closer. Too close. What's a man like you doing out here on a road like this? Michael blinked. I'm going home. I live off Jasper Ridge. The officer's eyes narrowed. Mind stepping out of the vehicle? Michael hesitated, and that was the moment everything shifted. What, you got something to hide? The officer barked suddenly, hand going to the holster. No, sir, Michael said, voice catching. Can I ask what I did wrong? The gun came out. Not pointed. Not yet. But drawn. Michael's heart exploded in his chest. Step out of the damn car. Hands where I can see them. Michael obeyed. He stepped out slowly, hands raised, his breath fogging in the cool air. A neighbor's porch light flickered in the distance. No one outside. No one watching. On your knees. Michael hesitated. I said get on your knees. Michael dropped. Gravel bit into his slacks. His knees screamed. He stared at the dirt, breathing through panic. You people never learn, Kersey muttered above him. Always thinking you're better than the rest. I don't care what school you teach at. You run your mouth again, I swear to God. And then silence. A car passed. Brief headlights washed over the scene, illuminating everything. Kersey holstered the gun. Stay there. He returned to his cruiser. The spotlight came on. Michael stayed frozen. His knees hurt. His back hurt. His pride was shattered. But worse than all of it was the quiet thought forming in his head. He could have shot me. He wanted to. After several minutes, Kersey came back. You're free to go. Just like that. Michael didn't move. Kersey tossed the license and registration to the ground beside him. Don't make me say it again. Michael stood, slowly, picked up his things. He got back in his car, closed the door, locked it. His hands were shaking. His face burned. He didn't drive for several minutes. Just sat there, breathing. The officer's cruiser pulled away first. Only when the red taillights disappeared did Michael start the car again. He got home at 7:15. Candace met him at the door, concern already blooming on her face. What happened? She asked. I called twice. Michael walked past her into the kitchen, poured a glass of water. His hands trembled. The glass clinked against the counter. Mike? He turned, met her eyes, said nothing, and then, softly, he spoke. I thought he was going to kill me. Michael didn't sleep that night. He lay beside Candace, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling fan spinning its lazy loops. She had asked him a few more questions when he came home, but he couldn't give her much. His voice cracked when he tried. Eventually, she wrapped her arms around him, and he let her hold him in silence until the world outside turned blue again. But in his mind, he never left the side of that road. The gravel was still cutting into his knees. The gun was still inches from his face. And Officer Kersey's voice, sharp, loaded, unprovoked, kept repeating in his head like a scratched record. You people never learn. By sunrise, Michael had decided he wasn't going to let it slide. Not this time. He was a man who followed rules, who paid his taxes, who held office hours, who taught young minds about empathy, about truth. He was a father, a husband, a good neighbor, the kind of man who put his cart back at the grocery store and knew all the names of the kids on his block. And yet, even that, all of it, hadn't protected him. He'd done everything right, and it still almost got him killed. At 9 a.m., Michael was sitting across from Chief Linda Coates at the Municipal Police Headquarters, his nerves taut like piano wire. Coates was a black woman in her early 50s, respected, composed. She wore her silver-streaked hair in tight twists and her uniform pressed like paper. Her office was tidy, with commendations on one wall and family photos on the other. He told her everything. From the moment he saw the headlights to the moment he picked his license off the ground. Coates didn't interrupt. She took notes, asked a few clarifying questions, and watched him with steady eyes. Did the officer threaten to shoot you? She asked finally. He didn't say the words, Michael replied. But he didn't have to. Did he physically touch you? No. Did he search your vehicle? No. Do you have any video? Dashcam phone? No. It all happened too fast. She leaned back, fingers tented. This is serious, Professor Harper. But without footage or witnesses. Michael stiffened. You think I'm lying? Her brow furrowed. No. I'm saying the system demands more than your word. He nodded slowly. That's what I thought. But as he stood to leave, she added quietly, file the complaint anyway. Make it official. He did. And then he walked out into a town he no longer trusted. Later that day, Michael stood in front of his students, struggling to find the thread of Baldwin's prose. They could tell he was off. The usual warmth in his lectures was gone. He caught one student, Jamal, a sharp-minded sophomore, watching him with concern. "Professor," Jamal asked at the end of class, "you good?" Michael almost said yes. Almost gave the polite answer. But then something in him snapped. He told them. Not the entire class. Just Jamal and a few others who stayed behind. He described the stop. The gun. The gravel. The words. They listened, wide-eyed and silent. And then Jamal said, "You should talk about this. People need to hear it." Michael gave a dry laugh. "You think it'll make a difference?" "It might," said Jamal. "And if it doesn't, at least they'll know you didn't stay quiet." By Friday, word had started to spread. A local blogger posted about the stop after hearing it secondhand. Candace shared her own thoughts online. A few students created a petition demanding an internal investigation into Officer Kersey's conduct. Michael hadn't planned on it becoming public. But once it was, there was no going back. Emails flooded in. Some supportive, some angry, some terrifying. He had to disable comments on his department page after someone wrote, "Should have shot him when he had the chance." The department released a brief statement. "We take all complaints seriously and are reviewing the matter." Michael stared at it on his screen. Cold. Sterile. Empty. He hadn't asked for attention. He hadn't wanted to become a story. But stories were powerful. And once told, they moved like fire. A week later, he received a call from an attorney named Simone Langston, civil rights specialist out of Atlanta. She had read about his case and wanted to meet. They sat down in a quiet cafe. She wore a tailored gray blazer and spoke like someone used to not being believed, firm, unflinching. "You have no video. No witnesses. No injury. It's your word against his. But that doesn't mean it's unwinnable." Michael watched her. "I'm not trying to sue the town," he said. "I just want to make sure he doesn't pull a gun on the next person who looks like me." Simone nodded. "I get it. But change only comes when someone pushes. You ready to be that someone?" He wasn't sure, but he said yes anyway. 2 nights later, while walking to his car after an evening class, Michael found a note taped to his windshield. "Liar." The letters were thick, red, and dripping, paint or blood, he couldn't tell. His stomach turned. He looked around. No one in sight. That night, Candace begged him to drop it. "It's not worth it, Mike. Not if it puts us in danger." He held her hands. "If I drop it, I'm telling every black boy in this town to shut up and take it. I can't do that." "What about our son?" she whispered. "What about Devin?" And that hit deeper than anything else. Devin was 11. Smart. Sweet. Lanky. Obsessed with comic books and his new bike. What would he do if this happened to him? Would he know what to say? Would he survive? Michael stared out the window for a long time that night, watching the dark. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't an activist. He was just a man who almost died with his hands in the air. And he wasn't going to let that go. Michael hadn't expected to become a symbol. He was still showing up for lectures, still grading midterms, still driving Devin to and from school, trying to keep the edges of their world from fraying. But something fundamental had shifted. When he walked through town now, people didn't just see Professor Harper. They saw the guy from the police thing. And with that came attention he never wanted. At first it was quiet. Sideways glances. Awkward silences. People whispering when he passed. Then it got louder. Someone slipped a note under his office door. "Stop spreading lies, or we'll stop you." His mailbox was stuffed with hate mail the following Monday. One letter, scrawled in shaky handwriting, read, "You people are never satisfied until you ruin everything." And yet, Michael didn't stop. Not because he wasn't scared, he was, but because silence had already almost gotten him killed. Simone filed an official civil complaint on his behalf. The town council scheduled a closed-door session with the police oversight committee. Public pressure mounted. The local NAACP chapter got involved. Journalists started sniffing around. CNN called. Michael refused the interview. He didn't want to be anyone's headline. What he did agree to, however, was a town hall. Simone warned him. "These things can get ugly." He nodded. "They already are." The night of the town hall, the room was packed. Folding chairs filled the community center, and people still lined the back walls. Teachers, parents, students, business owners, retirees. The local news had cameras set up near the podium. Michael sat near the front with Candace and Simone. His palms were damp. When Chief Coates stepped to the microphone and opened the floor, a white man in a golf pullover stood first. "I've lived here 30 years," he began. "Never once had an issue with Officer Kersey. He's a good man. Decorated veteran. Are we really going to crucify him over one man's story?" A few people clapped. Michael felt Simone stiffen beside him. Another man stood. "I'm a parent, and I can't imagine what Professor Harper felt, but we don't know what happened. There's no proof. Let's not rush to judgment." Then a woman in a bright yellow headscarf raised her hand. "My son is 17. Last month, he told me he avoids driving through the north side after dark. Said a cop followed him all the way home once, no lights, no reason. When I asked which cop, he said, 'I don't know. White dude with a jaw like a bulldog. Sounds like Kersey to me.'" That started a murmur. One by one, others came forward. Some with praise for Kersey, others with stories like hers. Quiet, hesitant, but they were there. Echoes of the same fear, the same encounters, the same violence in subtle forms. When Michael finally stood, the room quieted. He didn't use notes. He just spoke. "You know me. I've taught your kids. I shop where you shop. I've mowed lawns for neighbors and helped coach Little League when Coach Daniels got sick." He paused. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to have a gun waved in my face because I went 5 miles over the limit. But it happened. And if it happened to me, someone who follows every rule, who smiles and speaks gently and wears a tie to work, then you better believe it's happening to people without any of those protections." The room was silent. He let that hang. "And if I don't speak now, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if the next kid who runs into that officer won't be as lucky as I was." No applause. Just wait. Truth sitting heavy in the air. The next day, Officer Kersey's union issued a statement defending him. Decorated, experienced, a man of integrity. They insisted his use of force was never unjustified and warned against trial by public opinion. Michael read it in the staff lounge between classes, the words blurring in his vision. Trial by public opinion? Wasn't that what he was living through? By week 3, Michael's tires were slashed in the parking lot behind campus. Campus security filed a report. Nothing came of it. He stopped letting Devin bike to the park alone. Candace asked if they should consider staying with her sister out of town for a while. Michael shook his head. "If I run, I give them what they want." She looked at him, pain in her eyes. "What if staying gives them what they want?" They didn't argue. They didn't yell. But that night, they slept with a chair propped under the doorknob. Then something shifted. A local artist painted a mural downtown, Michael's silhouette with the words, "Seen, heard, worthy." It went viral. A group of students held a silent protest on campus. All black. All wearing shirts that read, "Hands up doesn't mean threat." Michael stood at a distance and cried. Not because of the pain, but because of the beauty in resistance. Because someone else picked up the thread. At the next council meeting, Simone submitted dozens of affidavits, stories from people who had encounters with Kersey going back 15 years. Some were minor, others deeply unsettling. An internal review was launched. Officer Kersey was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The news broke on a Tuesday. Michael was in his office, sipping coffee, when Candace called him. "He's out," she said, breathless. "It's not everything, but it's something." Michael didn't cheer. He just exhaled, as if for the first time in weeks. But the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That night, someone threw a brick through his living room window. It shattered with a sound like a scream, glass spilling across the floor. Devin shrieked from the hallway. Candace ducked. Michael ran outside, heart pounding, but saw no one, just the echo of tires speeding away. On the brick, in sloppy black marker, was scrawled, "Shut up or you're next." The brick wasn't the last warning. A week later, Michael found red spray paint across his garage door. "Race baiter," in bold, dripping letters, like blood that refused to dry. The police came, took a report. The officer, a different one this time, young, nervous, offered a rehearsed apology and a promise that they'd look into it. Michael didn't believe him. Candace stood beside him on the porch, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her voice low. "How many bricks have to fly before someone does more than write a damn report?" Michael had no answer. Devin started sleeping in their bed again. At 11 years old, he'd stopped pretending he wasn't scared. That Sunday, Michael didn't go to church. He sat alone in his study, blinds drawn. A cup of coffee went cold on the windowsill. He stared at his bookshelf, Baldwin, Morrison, Du Bois, Coates, voices of survival and resistance. He wanted to believe he was one of them. But right now, he just felt tired. His phone buzzed. A text from Simone. "They're holding a protest downtown. Peaceful. Starts at 2. I'll be there." Michael stared at the screen for a long time. Then he changed his shirt, kissed Candace and Devin, and drove toward the crowd. Main Street was filled with people. Black, white, brown. Students and seniors, clergy and children. They held signs. "Justice is not optional. I'm not a threat. Police reform now." Michael recognized some of his students. They waved, eyes wide with something between admiration and fear. Simone found him near the courthouse steps. She looked exhausted, but smiled. "You came. I almost didn't," he admitted. "Almost doesn't count anymore," she said, and looped her arm through his. A pastor led the crowd in a prayer. A young girl read a poem about what it means to be seen as dangerous before you even speak. Then Simone handed Michael the mic. He hesitated, then looked out at the hundreds of faces, so many of them young, hopeful, afraid, angry. "I'm not here because I want revenge," he began. "I'm here because I want to live. I want my son to live. I want the next black man who gets pulled over to be scared of a speeding ticket, not of never going home again." The crowd murmured, then clapped. "I was stopped at gunpoint, not because I did anything wrong, but because of what I look like. I survived. But survival isn't enough." He stepped back. The crowd didn't cheer, they listened. And maybe that was better. That night, the protest made national headlines. Clips of Michael speaking aired on MSNBC and BBC. His inbox filled with messages. Some were supportive. Others were venom. One simply read, "Next time, you won't be so lucky." Simone forwarded everything threatening to the FBI. She was pushing for federal hate crime charges. It would be a long shot, but maybe it would send a message. Michael kept working, teaching, writing, refusing to shrink. Still, Every time a car slowed near his driveway, his heart lurched. Every knock at the door made Devin flinch. They got a security system. Candace got a concealed carry permit. Michael, for the first time in his life, seriously considered moving. Then came the indictment. Not for attempted assault. Not for reckless endangerment. But for official misconduct and excessive use of force, charges that carried weight, if not certainty. Officer Kersey was formally arraigned. He pled not guilty. His lawyer claimed the officer had reason to believe Michael was reaching for a weapon. The footage from the body cam, however, told a different story. Kersey's own words betrayed him. "You people always act like you're so damn smart. Step out before I make you. I swear to God, you flinch and you'll be on the pavement." Michael watched the video in court, his jaw tight. Devin wasn't allowed inside. Candace held his hand in the hallway. Outside, people held signs on both sides. "Support our police. No justice, no peace." After the hearing, Simone spoke to reporters. "We're not just seeking justice for one man. We're holding a system accountable. Officer Kersey's actions weren't an exception. They were a symptom." Michael stepped up once she was done. He said only one sentence. "If you think this story ends with a trial, you haven't been listening." That night, Michael found Devin in his room, curled up with a sketchbook. "What are you working on?" he asked gently. Devin held up a drawing. It was of their family, the three of them standing together. Michael's figure had a cape. Devin had scribbled the word truth across it. Michael swallowed hard. "Why the cape?" he asked, voice hoarse. Devin shrugged. "Because you don't let people make you small, even when they want to." A month later, the trial date was set. Michael took unpaid leave from work. Not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't teach and relive that night over and over again. Candace supported him, even when she was scared. Even when Devin cried and asked if the bad cop would come back. The community sent meals, groceries, money. The pastor came by and prayed with them. Michael didn't sleep much, but he never stopped showing up. The courthouse stood like a monolith, gray, cold, and older than any of the ideas of justice it was meant to represent. On the morning of the trial, Michael sat in the parking lot for 15 minutes before he could force himself to step inside. He hadn't planned to testify. But Simone called the night before and said simply, "They need to hear you, not just see the video." Now, he sat in a wooden pew beside Simone and Candace, his hands clenched in his lap. The room was quiet, too quiet. The hum of air conditioning, the click of a pen, the occasional cough. On the other side of the aisle, Officer Kersey sat beside his lawyer, stone-faced, unmoving. He looked less like the man who had screamed into Michael's window, and more like a man auditioning for remorse. A jury of 10 white people and 2 black women watched everything with unreadable expressions. The prosecution opened with the footage. It was grainy, unsteady, but there was no mistaking what it showed: the gun, the shouting, the fury in Kersey's voice. There was no threat visible from Michael. No sudden move. Just confusion, fear, and restraint. The prosecutor asked Michael to take the stand. He rose slowly. The courtroom seemed to shrink as he crossed the floor, heart pounding so hard he thought everyone must hear it. Under oath, he told the truth. Not just the facts of that night, but the feeling. The feeling of seeing your life calculated in a man's twitching finger. "I didn't move because I was scared he wanted me to," Michael said quietly, "so he could say it was justified." He paused. "I didn't want my son to have to grow up telling people his father died for nothing but looking the wrong way at the wrong man." There was a silence, so complete it seemed to stretch the walls of the room. Cross-examination was swift but sharp. "Mr. Davis, isn't it true that you've spoken publicly at protests?" the defense attorney asked. Yes. Do you consider yourself an activist? Michael thought for a moment. I consider myself a father who doesn't want to be a hashtag. There was a ripple in the gallery. The judge banged the gavel once. Order. The defense tried to rattle him, but Michael didn't break. He'd already lived the worst moment. Nothing they said could undo that. When he stepped down, Candace reached for his hand. It was shaking. Outside the courtroom, cameras waited. Microphones. Angry voices. Some shouted support. Others called him a liar. One man waved a sign that read, "He deserved it." Michael didn't flinch. But that night, he checked all the locks twice. The trial lasted 4 days. Kersey didn't testify. His lawyer painted him as overworked, undertrained, and acting on instinct in a high-stress situation. Michael wanted to laugh or scream. Instead, he sat still and listened as his trauma was dissected and rationalized. The final arguments came on Friday. Simone's voice was fierce and controlled. "We don't convict a man for fear. We convict for abuse of power. Officer Kersey didn't just fear a black man. He acted on that fear with a weapon. And he did so without cause. If we excuse that, we write permission slips for every badge to become a bullet." The defense closed with a shrug. "It's a dangerous world. Officers have to make split-second decisions." As if split seconds justified permanent endings. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. Michael didn't go home. He waited in the courthouse lounge, staring at a soda machine he didn't want anything from. Candace sat beside him, holding his hand. Devin was with his aunt. Michael had asked him not to watch the verdict on TV. He wanted to be the one to tell him, one way or the other. When the door opened and the bailiff called him back in, Michael's stomach twisted so hard it felt like it might fold into itself. He walked in, bracing. "Will the defendant please rise?" Officer Kersey stood. The forewoman, a black woman with silver hair, cleared her throat. "On the charge of official misconduct, we find the defendant guilty." Michael exhaled, barely. "On the charge of excessive use of force, we find the defendant guilty." A gasp swept the room. Kersey's face didn't change, but his jaw locked hard. The judge set sentencing for the following month. Michael sat down, trembling. It wasn't justice, not fully. But it was something. A recognition. A start. That night, he told Devin. They sat in the backyard, under the porch light. The wind carried the scent of rain and cut grass. "So what happens now?" Devin asked. Michael stared up at the sky. "Now we keep living." Loudly. The weeks that followed were strange. People treated Michael like a symbol. Like a man who had stood up and won. But he didn't feel like a winner. He still flinched when sirens passed. Still checked every rearview mirror. Still dreamed about a man screaming through a cracked window with a gun in his hand. Candace noticed. She started leaving little notes on the bathroom mirror. "You made it through. You're still here. Don't let them steal your peace, too." Then came sentencing. Kersey's lawyer requested probation and community service, citing no prior history and a lifetime of service. Simone argued for jail time. "Intent does not excuse harm," she said, "and fear cannot be a shield from consequence." The judge sentenced Kersey to 2 years in prison, with possibility of parole after 1. Some called it a slap on the wrist. Others called it a landmark. Michael didn't know what to call it. All he knew was that he would never get back the ease with which he used to drive down his own street. Later that day, he visited his old classroom. His students had made a banner. "Welcome back, Mr. D." There were tears. Hugs. One kid whispered, "You're the reason I want to be a lawyer now." Michael smiled. He realized maybe justice wasn't a moment. Maybe it was the ripple. Michael didn't expect peace, but he had hoped for quiet. Instead, he found a different kind of noise, subtler, meaner, like the hiss under a door in a locked room. The trial was over, but the aftershocks were constant. 1 week after the sentencing, a brick came through their front window. It was wrapped in a Confederate flag and scrawled with 3 words in shaky sharpet. "You got lucky." The police came, took pictures, wrote a report. They didn't catch anyone. "Probably just some drunk kid," the officer mumbled, not looking Michael in the eye. Candace wanted to move. Michael didn't. "It's our home," he said. "If we run, they win." Candace didn't argue, but the next day, she installed new locks and set up cameras around the porch. Devin started checking the windows every night before bed. Michael caught him once, flashlight in hand, peeking through the curtains. "You okay, Dee?" Devin shrugged. "Just making sure." Michael walked over, knelt down beside him. "You don't have to be scared in here." Devin looked at him, eyes too old for 12. "You weren't scared in the car, either." But bad stuff still happened. Michael didn't know what to say to that, because Devin was right. The whispers came next, in the grocery store, at the gas station, in the school parking lot. Michael heard his name in sentences that stopped when he walked by. He saw eyes flicker away. People who used to nod now avoided him. Even in his own classroom, he felt the shift. A parent withdrew their child from his elective, citing concerns about objectivity. Another emailed the principal, questioning whether Michael's political notoriety made him unsuitable to teach. He stayed professional, calm. But the air felt thinner every day. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived from the Department of Internal Affairs. It wasn't an apology. It was an invitation. They wanted Michael to speak to a panel reviewing the use of force policies statewide. "Your case has prompted reflection," it said. "We believe your input could shape future training protocols." Michael stared at the paper for a long time. Candace read it over his shoulder. "You don't have to do this." "I know," he said. "But maybe I should." She didn't reply. But that night, she left another note on the mirror. "You're allowed to rest, too." The hearing was in Atlanta. Michael wore his best suit and brought only a single page of notes. The room was full of brass, police chiefs, policy analysts, attorneys, and a few elected officials. Their faces were polite, their pens ready. He stood at the microphone and didn't read from the page. "I'm not here to say all cops are bad," he began. "I'm here to say one was. And if one is allowed to act like he did and still wear a badge, then the system says it's okay." He spoke about fear. Not just the officers, but his own. His sons. His students. "Fear doesn't make a man dangerous," he said. "But power without accountability does." He sat down to silence. Then a few scattered nods. Later, a woman from the board approached him privately. "My brother's a cop," she said. "I didn't want to hear you, but I'm glad I did." After that, something shifted. Not around Michael, within him. He'd spent months waiting for the tension to ease. It didn't. But he realized maybe it wasn't supposed to. Maybe it was fuel. He started writing again, not just blog posts, but essays. Short pieces on justice, fatherhood, and the weight of skin. One went viral after Simone shared it. A nonprofit reached out and asked if he'd speak at their annual conference. He said yes. Then yes again and again. But with visibility came new attacks. He got an email one night. No name, no subject. Just 4 words. "Watch your back, boy." He deleted it. But the next day, he hesitated before unlocking his classroom door. He bought a second lock for his car. He scanned crowds without thinking. One morning, he caught his reflection in a mirror at school and didn't recognize the man staring back. Not because he looked different, but because he moved different. Tighter. Quieter. Like a man always expecting to be followed. Simone noticed. "You're burning at both ends," she told him. "You can't fix the whole system by yourself." "I'm not trying to fix it," he said. "Just maybe bend it. A little." She smiled. "That's what they all say, right before they fall apart." The worst came 2 months later. He and Devin were leaving the bookstore when a man stepped out from behind a pickup truck, blocking their path. White. Tall. Late 50s. Baseball cap low over his eyes. "You're that Davis guy, right?" the man said. Michael tensed. Devin moved closer. "Yeah," Michael said evenly. The man nodded. "Thought so." He stepped forward. Michael's pulse spiked. He reached instinctively toward Devin's shoulder. The man didn't raise a weapon. Didn't shout. Instead, he leaned in and said low and cold, "Next time you feel brave, maybe think about what your kid would do without you." Then he walked away. Michael couldn't move. Devin whispered, "Dad?" He blinked. "Yeah, I'm here." But he didn't feel here. He felt like he was back in that car, held still by fear. That night, Candace found him outside, sitting on the porch with his head in his hands. "I'm trying so hard to keep going," he whispered. "But it's like they don't want me to live, just survive." She sat beside him, put her hand over his. "You don't owe them survival, Michael. You owe your son a life." The next day, he filed a report. Told the school. Talked to Simone. He even reached out to a therapist, for the first time in his life. "I used to think strength meant holding it in," he told the counselor during their first session. "Now I think maybe that's just how we die quietly." The counselor nodded. "And how do we live loudly?" Michael didn't have an answer, but he wanted to find one. Spring came late that year. The air hung heavy with pollen and the scent of wet asphalt, but Michael barely noticed. He moved through the days like a man wading upstream, deliberate and weary. Therapy became a constant, Thursday evenings at 6. The first few sessions were stiff, more factual than emotional. But slowly, Michael began to speak not just with his mouth, but with his chest, his ribs, his lungs. He talked about fear the way others talk about weather, as something inevitable and always overhead. One session, the counselor asked, "What does safety look like to you?" Michael didn't answer right away. Finally he said, "My son laughing. My wife sleeping without checking the locks twice. My own heartbeat not speeding up every time I see flashing lights in my rear view." The counselor nodded. "That's not too much to ask." Michael gave a bitter laugh. "It feels like it is." Meanwhile, Devin had stopped asking questions. That worried Michael more than the fear. He used to ask everything. Why do police carry guns? Why do people hate? Why does skin change how people see you? Now he just watched, observed, and avoided. Michael found him in the garage one day, sitting inside the parked car, holding the steering wheel with both hands. "What are you doing, bud?" Devin didn't look up. "Just practicing." "For what?" "A beat." Then, "In case something happens to you." Michael couldn't speak. He walked over and opened the door, then sat in the passenger seat beside his son. "I need you to do me a favor," Michael said gently. "Next time you feel scared about that, tell me. Don't hold it by yourself." Devin nodded, but didn't promise. And that made it harder. One morning in early May, Michael received an email from a civil rights group based in D.C. They'd read his essays. They wanted him to speak on a national panel about police violence, trauma, and the legacy of institutional racism. It was the kind of opportunity that once would have thrilled him. Now it just made his hands shake. He called Candace. Do you think I'm helping at all? He asked. You think you're not? I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm just poking at an infected wound, making it worse. Candace paused. Maybe, but sometimes wounds have to be opened to heal right. Michael sat with that, then said yes to the panel. The trip to D.C. was strange. He had never been farther than Atlanta since Devin was born. Walking through the airport with just a carry-on and a suit bag felt surreal, like he was playing someone else in a movie about his life. The hotel was nicer than he expected. The view from the 14th floor overlooked the Washington Monument, tall and gleaming in the afternoon sun. He stood at the window, staring down at people who looked so small, so distant from everything he carried. The panel was held in a sleek auditorium inside a civic institute. The other speakers included a retired police chief, a professor, and a mother whose son had been killed during a routine traffic stop. When Michael's turn came, he took a deep breath and began. I used to think being quiet was safe, he said. But silence is where rot grows. And I've seen what happens when rot is left alone. He talked about the stop, the shouting, the fear. But he also talked about the mornings after, about checking doors, about walking his son to school, about the noise in his head that never fully left. He ended with this. I don't want to be brave. I want to be boring. I want to be just another man driving home to his family. That shouldn't be a revolutionary act. The room was quiet. Some people cried. Others sat still. Afterward, a young man approached him in the lobby. Your story, it's my dad's story. And my uncle's. And mine. Michael nodded. They hugged. It was brief, but real. Back home, Michael's students began asking questions again. Mr. Davis, are you famous now? He laughed. Not even close. One student raised their hand. Why don't you just quit? Like teaching. You could be on TV all the time. Michael looked around the room. Because this, he said, gesturing to the desks, the chalkboard, the rows of young, curious eyes, is where I matter most. That night, Simone called. I saw the panel. You were incredible. Michael smiled. Thanks. But I need to tell you something, she said. Officer Mulligan, the one from your stop, he's appealing. Wants to get his pension back. Michael's stomach dropped. You're kidding. I wish I were. The union's backing him. Says the trial was biased. That the media tainted the jury pool. Michael felt the walls of his living room closing in. What happens now? There's going to be a review hearing. Internal. No jury this time. Just a board. He was silent for a long time. Then, I want to be there. Candace didn't want him to go. He already took so much from you, she said. Why let him take more? Michael looked at her, steady. Because if he wins, if they give him back his future after trying to take mine, I need to see it. I need to face it. For me. Candace didn't argue. But she held him that night tighter than she had in months. The hearing was cold and bureaucratic. A long table. A panel of suited officials. Mulligan's lawyer talked about his years of dedicated service. About an unfortunate misunderstanding amplified by the press. Michael wasn't called to speak. But he came anyway. Sat in the back. Watched Mulligan's pale face, his rigid jaw. And for the first time in months, Michael didn't feel afraid. He just felt clear. When the board asked for closing statements, Mulligan stood and said, I never meant harm. I was doing my job. Michael whispered under his breath. No, you were doing what you thought your badge let you get away with. He stood up and walked out. Back in his car, he sat for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. Then he called Devin. Hey, bud. Just checking in. Devin's voice was quiet. You okay? I am. Michael said. And he meant it. The courtroom was full, though the silence was thick as syrup. Darren sat in the front row beside his lawyer, hands folded in his lap, back straight like a steel rod. The incident had already gone viral months ago. Body cam footage, witness statements, expert analysis. But none of that meant justice was guaranteed. Not here. Not yet. Across from him sat Officer Callahan, looking stiff and pale in his neatly pressed uniform. His lawyers had trimmed the truth into something manageable. Procedural confusion, mistaken identity, reasonable fear. They painted Darren as unpredictable, as non-compliant, as threatening. And the narrative was working. Darren saw it in the shifting expressions of the jury, in the judge's tightened jaw. Earlier that morning, he had looked in the mirror and rehearsed his testimony for the 50th time. But once he stepped onto the stand, his voice surprised him, calm, measured, resolute. "I did exactly what I was told," Darren said, eyes fixed on the jurors. "Hands on the dash. No sudden movements. I told him I was reaching for my license before I did. He had no reason to pull his gun." The prosecutor nodded slowly. "And when he did, what were your thoughts?" Darren hesitated. "I thought I was going to die. That nothing I said or did mattered. That my life didn't matter." A sharp breath broke somewhere in the gallery. His mother, probably. "Were you angry?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes," Darren answered, and the word echoed louder than he expected. "But not just for me. For every name that came before mine. For how familiar this story is. For how disposable we're made to feel." He didn't cry. He refused to. But his throat burned with the weight of generations. When the questioning ended and he stepped down, there was a brief rustling, almost applause, almost defiance. The judge glared it into silence. Outside, the press was a wall, microphones, cameras, flashing lights. Darren ducked into the car with his lawyer and closed his eyes. He couldn't do another interview. Not tonight. Not after that. Back at his apartment, the exhaustion hit him like a wave. He sat at the edge of his bed, still in his suit, and stared at nothing. On the floor near his bookshelf was a worn cardboard box filled with letters. Strangers. Supporters. Survivors. Some were from parents who had lost their sons to traffic stops. Some from police officers who were tired of being silent. Darren hadn't read them all, but tonight he pulled a few at random. One read, "Your story is mine. I survived too, but I didn't speak up. Watching you has changed that. Thank you for your courage." Another, "You remind me of my son. He didn't make it. Please don't give up." He set the letters down gently, as if they were fragile, and breathed deep. He had started this for justice. But it had grown into something else. A mirror held up to America, one story among thousands. The next morning, he met with Lisa, his old professor turned confidant. She had come to every court date, every hearing. "You were powerful up there," she said, sliding him a coffee. "They felt you. Doesn't mean they'll convict." "No," she agreed. "But it means they won't forget." That stuck with him. Maybe that was part of justice, too, not erasure, not silence. Memory. They talked for hours, about systems and stories, about change and its cost. Before leaving, Lisa handed him a pamphlet for a grassroots legal initiative. "They need speakers. People who've lived it. You be perfect." He tucked it into his jacket without promising anything. Back home, he found an envelope under his door. No stamp, no address. Inside was a note typed and signed. "Careful who you think you're hurting. Some things don't stay buried." Darren stared at the words for a long time. The case had brought him into the light. Not everyone liked that. He didn't show the letter to his lawyer, didn't call the cops. He simply filed it away with the rest of the fear he'd learned to carry. The next court date came and went. More expert testimony. More contradictions. But something had shifted. The public was watching. And the department knew it. Callahan's demeanor had cracked. Less arrogance, more sweat. His defense team had begun to shift strategy. Settlement offers were whispered. Darren refused them all. "No money can make this clean," he told his lawyer. The final day of testimony loomed. Darren would speak again. Not just as a witness, but as a citizen, a man demanding accountability. He practiced his words with Lisa, rewrote them, scrapped them, started over. Every sentence mattered. Every pause. The night before court, he visited his mother. She was cooking, like always, though her eyes looked heavier. "I'm proud of you," she said, not turning from the stove. "You don't have to say that." "I don't. But I do." They sat on the porch as the sun set, sipping sweet tea. A neighbor waved. Someone honked down the block. Life and possibly normal. "You scared?" she asked. "Yeah." She nodded. "Means you care. You know, when your father was still alive, he always said you'd grow into your name." Darren smiled faintly. "What's that mean?" "It means you were born to carry heavy things. And to make people look twice." He stayed until it was dark, then walked home slow, head clear. Tomorrow would matter. Maybe not for the system, but for him. For the boy he used to be. For the ones watching, waiting to see what came next. The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs as people filed in for the final day of testimony. Reporters hunched over notepads. Lenses adjusted. Court artists etched outlines. Everyone was waiting for Darren to speak, one last time. He stood just behind the barrier, hands folded in front of him, his lawyer giving him a slow nod. The judge entered, and the room stood, then sat again, with the sound of rustling coats and shifting bodies. Officer Callahan avoided Darren's eyes. When the time came, Darren walked to the witness stand like he had done it 100 times. But this time, it was different. This wasn't about rehashing facts. This was his closing moment. His last breath before the plunge. He placed both hands on the edge of the witness box, looked at the jurors, and then at the judge. His voice was clear. "I was pulled over for nothing. That's the truth. I know it. You know it. And deep down, Officer Callahan knows it too." The courtroom stilled. "I did everything right that day. Everything they say we're supposed to do. And still, I had a gun pointed at my head. Not because I posed a threat. Not because I reached for anything. But because I was black. And because he could." He paused. "I wish I could tell you it was the first time I felt like my life didn't belong to me. But it wasn't. It started in childhood, being followed around in stores, being asked if I belonged in certain neighborhoods, being pulled over just because." One juror shifted uncomfortably. "When I stepped out of that car, I thought it was the end. But it wasn't. I lived. And I'm here. And that means something." He reached into his pocket and pulled out one of the letters he had received. "This is from a mother who lost her son the same way I almost died. She wrote, 'Tell the truth, even if they don't believe it. Even if they don't want to hear it. So here it is.'" He looked directly at Callahan now. "You didn't just pull a gun. You pulled the trigger on my dignity. On my peace. And I won't let you, or this system, pretend otherwise." When Darren stepped down, the room remained silent. No claps. No whispers. Just tension thick enough to bend the air. The jury was dismissed for deliberation. The hours crawled by. Darren waited in a private room, pacing like a man on parole. His lawyer said very little. He had done all he could. Now it was out of their hands. By the time the jury returned, Evening light was pouring in through the courthouse windows. The foreman stood, the paper in his hand trembling slightly. "We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty on all counts." A stillness fell over Darren like snowfall. Then, sound returned all at once. Chairs scraped. Someone gasped. Callahan's team patted his back. Darren sat motionless, jaw locked, chest rising and falling. His mother cried. Lisa squeezed his hand, but even she looked unsurprised. Justice had not come. Not from the system. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. They had been watching on screens in the adjacent plaza. When the verdict was announced, a mix of shouts broke out, some angry, some resigned. Protest signs waved. Police began to assemble down the block. Darren stepped out into the cold air, reporters closing in immediately. "Mr. Bryant, any comment on the verdict? Do you feel this was a fair outcome? Will you appeal the decision?" He stood still for a long moment, then finally said, "It may not be justice, but it's not the end. Not for me." He left the microphones behind and walked through the crowd. Some people reached out to touch his shoulder, nod at him, thank him. A teenager in a hoodie whispered, "You're the reason I speak up now." That night, the city pulsed with frustration. The protest was mostly peaceful, but the tension was volcanic. Sirens flashed. Helicopters hovered. Darren stayed inside, watching coverage unfold, his name scrolling across every cheer-in. In the weeks that followed, he was invited onto podcasts, panels, news shows. He declined most. What he said in court was what he needed to say. But he didn't disappear. Instead, he began working with the legal advocacy group Lisa had mentioned. He spoke in schools, led workshops on rights during police encounters, met with grieving families. Slowly, without spectacle, he built something lasting. In the summer, a law school invited him to guest lecture. When he asked why, the professor told him, "Because your story is in our textbooks now." Still, there were days when the weight came back. When he walked to his car and checked his mirrors twice. When the sound of a siren made his heart stumble. When he opened another anonymous letter filled with hate. But there were good days too. Days when he sat in a classroom of black teenagers and saw pride in their eyes. Days when a young lawyer sent him an email that said, "I became an attorney because I saw you fight." Days when he woke up and didn't feel afraid. 1 year after the trial, Darren returned to the spot where it all began. The highway shoulder was just as cracked and sun-bleached. He stood there for a moment, breathing deep, remembering. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. The letter from the mother. He pressed it gently under a rock beside the road. A new family pulled up nearby, broken taillight, a baby crying in the back seat. A different officer approached them. No shouting. No weapons. Just a warning and a nod. Darren watched quietly, then turned back toward his car. The sun was dipping below the trees. He felt the air shift, heavy but clean. He didn't have peace. Not fully. But he had purpose. And for now, that was enough.